He's the only person to be inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame twice, once with the Guess Who and once with Bachman-Turner Overdrive. Our guest today is Randy Bachman on the VVN Music Podcast. Hi, and welcome to episode 21 of the VVN Music Podcast. I'm Roger Wink, and today we go back in time a bit for an archive interview with Randy Bachman. At the time we recorded this interview in 2014, Randy had just released his new DVD, Vinyl Tap Tour, Every Song Tells a Story, a show that was divided into two halves, with the first concentrating on his career with the Guess Who, and the other with music from Bachman-Turner Overdrive. Our discussion ranged from his early days running in the same circles as Neil Young, his days with each group, and a variety of other subjects. As this is an archive interview and was not originally recorded for broadcast, the sound quality is a bit less than what we usually publish, but the stories are well worth a listen. Congratulations on the new album.
Thank you.
Now it's out today, correct?
I think so. I think today's the U.S. date. It's been out in Canada for a while, that triggered the U.S. and U.K. release because it's, to my astonishment, it's selling.
Wait, this album came out about because you did a tour which was essentially a storyteller's type show. What made you decide to go out and do that type of a show?
Well, about maybe 10 years ago, I was in London, England, and I saw a show called Storyteller, an evening with Ray Davies. So I went running there, which is pretty hard to do in London because you can't run anywhere because the streets are not parallel or perpendicular, and I got lost. It was like really stupid. So I finally get a taxi, and I'm sweating like mad, and I want to make this show. I jump into a London taxi and say, "Take me to the Drury Lane Theatre." He says, "Are you sure?" And I say, "Yes." And so I get in, he drives around the corner, and he says, "Here it is," and it cost me £5. I didn't know where I was. So I go running in, and the opening act is done. And so it's intermission, and Ray Davies is about to come on. But they're taking down the merch stand and the posters. It's the last date of this tour. He's done a 4 or 5 day tour there. So I go running up to the merch guy. I said, "Could I buy this poster?" He said, "You can have it. We're just throwing them away." So I roll up the poster and I take it in. I go and there's my one seat, and I sit next to a guy named Rupert Perry, who used to be the head of Capitol Records in Canada, and then at that time he's the head of EMI in all over Europe and in the UK. And so I know him. So we're sitting there talking. And at the end I say, "This show is just great." And he says, "You want to meet Ray Davies?" And I go, "Yeah, are you kidding?" So we go backstage and I meet him, and I've got the poster, so I pull it out and he autographs it. And he's stunned that I have his poster. I want him to autograph it to me. And I say, "That was just an amazing show." And he looks at me and he says, "You could do a better show than me. You've got two bands. You've got the Guess Who and BTO. You could tell all these stories." And I thought, not a bad idea. So I went back to Canada. At the same time, I got a request to do a charity show to raise some money for a cancer society. And I thought, well, instead of blowing everybody's face off with rock and roll, because it's a sit-down dinner and they're paying $2,500 a plate and it's a silent auction, I'll just get an acoustic guitar in my band and I'll tell the stories. And, like Ray Davies, I told the stories to different DJs all my life, like How Did You Write American Woman or Taking Care of Business. So to put them all together to me was quite an exercise so I had to, brain power and recollection and everything like that. So I put them chronologically, which makes it much easier for me to recall them, and did the evening. And everybody came up to me when it was done and said, "Boy, if you recorded that, we'd buy 12 copies and send them to our relatives all over the world," because everybody knows these songs, but nobody really knows where they came from or where you wrote them and the background and all that stuff. And I ended up doing a small tour, and it was successful. And then we did it again last year just by public request. And now you can find out what the public wants because everybody emails your website and things like that. So we took it out on the road and did about 30 or 40 dates in a row. Near the end, my manager said, "It's going so well." And finally, we had got together a montage to put behind me. So when I'm talking and my band is there waiting to play the song, behind me is a screen showing old baby pictures of me and my first guitar and the early Guess Who and early Bachman-Turner Overdrive and pictures of Neil Young, and all of us hung out together in Winnipeg at that time and all had the same teenage dream in like the mid-'60s there. And we did that DVD, and it's sold like mad in Canada, and that triggered the release now in the States and the UK and Australia and everywhere else. So I'm thrilled at this whole notch up, kicking it a notch up. It's just great.
It hopefully will have the same results here in the U.S. that you had in Canada with it.
That would be nice. But, if the fans are out there and they know and they like These Eyes or She's Come Undone or Let It Ride or something like that, and to hear the story there, it also prompted me when I heard stories, because I've been going to Nashville writing for years, and every time there's a songwriting kind of thing that I could attend as a fan. So I'm going to see John Phillips or David Gates from Bread or somebody like that and how they wrote their songs. I'm very touched by their stories. And so, I imagine in my mind my stories would also touch people in a good way or in a real deep feeling way or in a funny way. And I think it shows some of their faces in the audience. Some of them are quite amazing. It's quite a trip down memory lane to hear me tell the story, to visually see behind me the clothes, the cars, the haircuts of the 60s or 70s whenever the song was written, and then the band performs it, and it's the final ka-ching moment where you actually, you hear the record and what us on stage and it sounds like the record. That kind of completes the picture. And not only am I doing that, people I've seen in the last 2 years, the Beach Boys, Barry Gibb, they all put up the old videos, and even Queen. I saw Queen twice in the last month with Adam Lambert. They put those things up, and there's nothing like seeing what they used to look like, because they don't look like that now, neither do you. So it's like a 20 or 30-year jump back, and you go, oh, my God, weren't we silly? Wasn't our hair stupid? Weren't those mullet haircuts cuckoo? Weren't those plaid pants insane? Weren't those paisley shirts nuts? Weren't those cars cool? You know what I mean? Those kind of things. So that's kind of what it's like. It's like a whole memory lane trip. And in Canada, it's been called a must-see historical event, a history lesson in Canadian music, because it's not just me and my bands. It's basically what's happening in Canada from the early 60s when I was in the Guess Who. We had our first hit, Shakin' All Over, which was kind of like 65, and we're all like teenagers in high school not knowing what a hit record meant, except it got played on the radio. And then to be revisiting that 30 and 40 years later, it's an amazing thing for me to recall every night, that I'm actually sitting there with people who know artistically what I've done for the last 40 or 50 years.
I noticed from the track list on the DVD, CD, and the original set list from those shows, you did cut 3 songs out. Was there a reason to do that?
No, it was all timing. Some of the stories I told on that DVD were so long. I had the video editor, calling me, or the guys who were putting it together, saying, you can't fit all this on a DVD. You've got to cut some of it off, and a lot of it won't fit on the CD. So can we cut the story of Undone where the boy goes to the Bob Dylan thing or whatever it goes into? And I'm saying, well, as long as it doesn't hurt the story, taking care of business is a huge story. It's a long story. It goes from 67 up to when I did it up to right now. You know what I mean? It's like long. So they took up some songs that they thought weren't, I think Hey You's not in there.
No, Hey You is the 3 that I have down are My Favorite Things, We Gotta Change, and Oya Como Va.
Oh. Oya Como Va is only part of how I wrote Taking Care of Business. So I only play about 10 seconds of it, saying how I wrote Taking Care of Business. And they said they couldn't get clearance from the publisher on that. Tito Puente wrote it. They couldn't get publisher, so that was like taken out. So, they did a lot of artistic things there that weren't artistic. They were business. But as long as I touched on my main hits, These Eyes, Laughing, Shakin' All Over, She's Come Undone, No Sugar Tonight, American Woman, No Time, Let It Ride, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Taking Care of Business, on 4-wheel drive, rolling down the highway, whatever. Those are all in there, and maybe the next one I'll squeeze in a few more.
You start, on the DVD, you start with Prairie Town. What's the story behind that?
Well, I had a chance to do an album in the mid-'90s. A new guy had taken over Sony Canada, and he was looking for Canadian talent. He called me up. He said, do you have a record deal? And I said, no. Well, I'll release a record. You want to do a solo record? So I thought, well, what the heck can I do? So I sat down and wrote a song that was retrospective about growing up in Winnipeg, the ultimate prairie town. And at the same, as I was rewriting it and recording it, I got a fax from Neil Young's guitar roadie, Larry Craig. He said, I'm looking for a switch tip for a Gretsch. I know you're a Gretsch collector. Neil needs a couple for his Gretches. Do you have any? So I threw some into an envelope and mailed it to him down in California. I also put in the lyrics to Prairie Town. And a few days later, out of my fax machine comes a thing from Neil Young from Broken Arrow Ranch. And I'm looking at this in amazement and going, wow, what's this? And it's from Neil saying, thanks for the switch tips for the Gretsch. Read the lyrics to Prairie Town. I want to be part of this song. I love the lyrics. And he hadn't heard the song yet. He just read the lyrics. So here's my number. So I called him up, and he said, yeah, come on down to the ranch, and I want to play on this song. So I said, well, I've got two versions, a slow and fast version. He said, great, I'll play on them both. It's like Tonight's the Night. I did like 10 versions of the song. So I flew down to his ranch and recorded the slow and fast version of Prairie Town. And then when I stayed overnight, I'm having breakfast the next day with him and Peggy before I leave. And he says to me, I want to be in the video. And I'm thinking, what? Am I going to do a video? I wasn't planning to do a video. I didn't think this was a single because it's a long song and it's a story song. And so at that moment, I knew I was shooting a video. So he said, come on back in a week or so. I'll get my crew together. And because he has a crew all the time that films everything he does. So I went back and we shot a slow and fast version, and he's playing on them both. And the slow version, I think, and you might even see some clips of the fast one in the beginning there, because Neil was an integral part of my beginnings in Winnipeg. I was an integral part of his beginnings in Winnipeg, and we were all going at the same time to the early Guess Who, the Devrons that Burton Cummings was in, Neil Young and the Squires, and we were all bands in the Winnipeg area in 65, 66, 67. Then boom, we all left town and had our hits with the Guess Who and Buffalo Springfield, and and then I went on to BTO and everything else. So it was very important to have that song there. It kind of puts the setting in there, especially if you're Canadian.
When did you join with Chad Allen? Was that in the late 50s?
No, it was about 61, 62, something like that.
Okay, and then around the mid, and I think you said 65, Shakin' All Over happened, and it was a hit both it was a hit in a number of countries.
Yeah.
Was that supposed to be put out as Chad Allen and the Expressions, or was?
Well, we had first of all, we wanted to be like Cliff Richard in the Shadows. So Chad Allen's real name was Alan Cowbell, Kowbel, which was not a great musical name at the time. So he decided to keep Allen as his last name and get a British name like Chad and Jeremy or something. So he became Chad Allen and the Reflections. And then a band called the Reflections had a hit called Just Like Romeo and Juliet. And we got a letter from the lawyer saying, you can't be called the Reflections. So we tried to find something that sounded like Reflections, and I thought of Expressions. So we became Chad Allen and the Expressions. A month later, we got a letter from another lawyer from Detroit who said, I represent a band called the Expressions. They've been together, 14 months. We just signed with Motown. You can't use that name. Meanwhile, we cut the song Shakin' All Over we had gotten from somebody in England. It had been a hit in England in 61 by Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, who wrote it, and we were desperate to record a song that nobody else knew of until we got this record from a cousin in England, recorded Shakin' Over and sent it into our record label in Toronto. And they said, this song sounds like a hit. It sounds like a British party record. It's really great. And it's a real garage punk rock sound. It's really great. What's the name of the band? And we said, we don't have a name. Every time we get a name, we get a cease and desist order. And they said, we want to put this out right now. And they put out a white label that said Shakin' All Over on it, about half-inch tall print. And at the bottom, they put Guess Who and a question mark as the band, and that went out to, they did 50 copies. It went out to 50 radio stations in Canada, and then the buzz started, and they were saying this was cut at a British party by Joe Meek, who cut, Telstar at a party, and it's got Brian Jones on it and George Harrison, and they can't say who it is because they're all in different bands, to sign a different label, so it's just Guess Who, so you got to guess who this is. So this British mystique about it, and it's sounding very British because we were copying a British hit. It went to number one in Canada, and Scepter Records put it out in the States. It was top 20 in Billboard, and suddenly we were called Guess Who, and that's how we got the name. And I tell that story in the DVD, so it's like people are... We didn't think of this name. This was no brainstorm. This was like, we thought it was a stupid name at the time. It was crazy. Because we went through all the jokes. That's when Abbott and Costello was big, and was Who's on First. Guess Who? And then the Who came out, a couple of years later, and we went to England in 67 and went to see the Who at the Marquee Club and said, you can't use this name. We own the name the Guess Who. Well, that's us. And they said, there's the Birds and the Yardbirds, so there can be the Who and the Guess Who. So just bugger off. We're going to keep this name. So that became a running joke with us and the Who. We were going to tour together just as John Entwistle was passing away, and call the tour Who's on First, because they were going to open one night and we were going to open the next night. The Guess Who and the Who on tour. We were going to take advantage of the Abbott and Costello joke, and right in the beginning, at front end of the tour, John Entwistle passed away.
Wow. You continued to have hits in Canada after Shakin' All Over, but here in the States, it was like 4 years before These Eyes broke.
Yeah, quite a dry spell. We had to come back. Well, Chad Allen quit the band because he became nameless and faceless. There was no Chad Allen anymore. He had started the band. He was the lead singer. He used to play lead guitar. And then when I went to my first audition with the band, and I had to learn a whole bunch of Shadow songs and Venture songs and stuff like that, and he broke a string, and I finished playing the lead guitar part because I had grown up playing violin, and all you play in a violin is lead. It's a lead instrument. It's like a clarinet. You've got to play the lead, right? And so I finished playing the song. He looked at me and he said, "Wow, you play better lead than me." And I said smugly, "Yes, I know." And he said, "Well, it's hard for me to play lead guitar and sing at the same time, so I'll just play rhythm and you play lead." So I became the lead guitar player. So he got bumped out of the lead guitar position, and then suddenly his name got off of the marquee. We were called Guess Who, and all we could do was put the in front of it. And sometimes we just called Guess Who, and sometimes it's the Guess Who. And he said, I don't like this. I'm going back to school. So he went back to University of Manitoba and got his degree. And we looked for another band in Winnipeg who had a great lead singer. That was called the Deverons, and their lead singer was Burton Cummings. So we got Burton Cummings to join the band. He joined in late 66, early 67. And we struggled and played high school dances and churches and socials and weddings and bar mitzvahs and fashion shows and anywhere we could play until he and I started to write together. And out of that came These Eyes, Laughing, No Time, American Woman, all that string of hits for the Guess Who. That all happened in about 2 years, from 68 till 70, and then I left in May of 1970. At that point, I'd been with the band 8 or 9 years.
To my understanding, you left the band, one, because of health problems, but also, it said at least, because of disagreements over, for lack of a better term, lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a good style. Yeah, it was the real term is the drug culture, and everything else was happening in the music business, and I was in it purely for the music, and other guys were in it for the party aspect and the music. Can't be unfair to them. And the lifestyle is just, it split in the late 60s, 67, 68, when I realized I'm allergic to smoke and I can't smoke, and everyone else is starting to smoke, not just cigarettes, but everything else. That was a big division. And then being Canadian, having to cross the border all the time, back and forth, and the chance of these guys getting busted and us never being able to work in the States again, and the old John Lennon green card, one marijuana joint bust where he couldn't work in the States, but he could live there because he couldn't be deported and all that stuff. It was like a haunting kind of thing, and I didn't want some other guy's bad habits, as I call them, because I didn't have those habits, to prevent what I had was a dream of being a touring rock and roll musician in the States and Canada and all over the world. So that was like a looming thing every night, and I keep saying to them, "You guys don't need to do this. We started out straight. We can still make our music straight," and they wanted to party, and I was like the narc at every party. And we didn't have a manager. I kind of managed the band. I was the leader of the band, and I have to get everybody up in the morning and deal with their headaches and their hangovers, and it just became so tedious. And then I started to have a gallbladder problem, having an attack every night on the road, which is the most painful thing in the world, every single night for 2 weeks. Finally had to go home to Winnipeg, and the doctor said you need 2 or 3 months off, and you need rest, and stop eating fried foods and sugary foods, because that'll kick in your gallbladder, and you'll have an attack because you've got gallstones. And that whole thing. So I went to the band and said, "I've got to go into the hospital and rest." They said, "Great, we're replacing you." So that was kind of a mutual, I wanted out, they wanted me out. And unfortunately it happened when American Woman album and single were #1 in the charts, and I was painted to look like an idiot leaving this band at the top of the mountain. Then they had Record World, Cashbox, and Billboard, and we were #1 album and single on all three of those in about April or May of 1970.
This is kind of an aside from the discussion. Are you still a practicing Mormon?
No, I stopped that about 10 years ago. When I decided that I couldn't smoke and drink, and I did join the Mormon Church, it kept me alive through those years because many of my other friends never made it. They all OD'd or became alcoholics or drug addicts, and they're all now in AA and NA, and I didn't have to go through any of that. I just, whenever I could, went to church on Sunday. You dress up and go there, and it's like a club, and it's like a health club, basically. You go there, and you know that everybody either doesn't or tries not to drink or smoke or drink coffee. I've never drank coffee to this day in my life. I haven't had a drink since I was 24. I've never smoked. I've never done any drugs. So if I keep on going, it's because of love of being alive and making music and searching for the next hit record that I'm going to try to write and play and sing.
You took off, it looks like you took off about a year between the Guess Who and when you started Brave Belt.
Yeah, that was my hospital recovering, going out to the in-laws in the country and just laying there in the sun and doing nothing because, the Guess Who we used to do, we were on the road like for 5 years solid. We never went home. We never did our laundry. We would leave behind our dirty laundry in the hotel room and go to JCPenney's and buy 3 packs of underwear and T-shirts and socks and just keep buying clean clothes and throwing the old ones away. And we just toured and toured and toured and toured. And then I took that time off, started BTO. It was the same thing. When BTO was together, or Brave Belt as we started out, we would tour 300 days a year. We'd do 90 days and go home for a week, and then 90 days and go home for a week, and then 90 days, and then the year is up. It's like, wow. And then suddenly 3 or 4 years go by. But those were the days before nationalized radio, before internet radio, before MTV, and you had to go everywhere for people to see you and to get a radio momentum going. You had to visit all these stations.
I'm not sure, though, with the way that record sales have gone, that it wouldn't be almost the same thing now since people are making so much of their money from touring.
It is. It's totally gone back to the 60s now. All your money is from touring or getting sync commercials where your song's used on a movie or a television show or a commercial. As a songwriter, you're getting ripped off, and as an artist, you're getting ripped off. And I wish they could fix it, but they choose not to, so they don't.
At least down here in the States, I'm not sure about in Canada, but I think that BTO probably is better remembered than the Guess Who, and that could probably be because of constant play on classic rock radio and so forth.
I think so. The Guess Who were more of a pop band, whereas BTO was like a heavy rock band. It was a new genre. We kind of evolved from the 60s. The amps got louder. The PA system got louder, which they call heavier, which is a polite word for loud. And it became heavier, loud rock and big hooks in the choruses of guitars and sing-along things. It was still pop music, but played heavier. And true, and BTO was about a 4 or 5 year flash, whereas the Guess Who was about double that. And BTO sold more records in a shorter period of time and hit number 1 with You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet and the album Not Fragile, and sold another 30 million records in a space of 3 to 4 years, where it took the Guess Who a long, long time. And the Guess Who went on without me into the late 70s, and still BTO surpassed them in record sales. And I think the public does remember BTO more because we're from that era of, 72, 73, when there was this explosion of Aerosmith and Peter Frampton and the Doobie Brothers and ZZ Top and the Allman Brothers, and it was like it was 2 guitars, bass, and drums, basically, the kind of music, and everybody loved it. Everybody was a guitar player. It was the carrying on of the tradition of the Beatles, who had kind of slowed down. The Stones went into hiatus at that time, and it was time for the new layer of bands, and I was very lucky that BTO was one of those new layer of bands, and they're still around today. I'm flying out next week to play with Peter Frampton on Frampton's Guitar Circus with him and Buddy Guy and Billy Gibbons and stuff like that, and we're all still around, which is quite amazing.
Is it hard for you in the show that you did for this DVD? Do you find it hard to transition between the Guess Who and the BTO music as far as style changes?
No, because I do it chronologically. So I start the show with Prairie Town, which is me and Neil Young, and the whole story growing up in Winnipeg and how all the bands got started. And then I go right from These Eyes to American, Shakin' All Over, actually, right through American Woman, and then it's an intermission. And I say, so that's the first half of my life, my musical life. Take a little break now, go out and buy a drink or go to the bathroom, come on back, put on your seatbelts, we're going to get into overdrive and roll on down the highway. People come in, we start with Roll On Down the Highway, and then boom, I do the BTO song. So the transition there is quite natural as far as leaving behind the pop music and leaving it on the edge with American Woman. That's the last song I do, and that was when I got to my peak with guitar riffs from These Eyes, which I wrote on piano for Burton. I'm not a piano player, I just happened to write that little beginning, to getting into guitar riffs. And if I had stayed with the Guess Who, we would have got more into heavier guitar riffs, because it was like me evolving and getting more of myself into the songs. There was that break of a year where I kind of got my life together and got healthy again, and then started what became Bachman-Turner Overdrive, and then out came the heavy rock.
I was doing a little bit of research, and it seems to me, if I'm not mistaken, that you are the only person who has been inducted twice into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. I assume that must have been just an amazing honor.
I didn't know that, but if that's true, it is an honor. I know I was in twice, but I didn't know if anybody else was. Maybe not.
I couldn't find anybody else in any of the groups or anything that would have been in there twice.
Well, I was very fortunate to be in these two bands out of Winnipeg that really dented and made a dent and rocked the world. I mean, with music in every single country, I was very fortunate to have that happen to me. I didn't make it happen; it just happened. I was there, with chasing a dream of wanting to be a guitar player, be like Elvis, and then be like John Lennon, and then be like Jimmy Page, and wanting to be like Neil Young, and Neil Young wanting to be like me, and Neil Young wanting to be like Elvis, and you all want to be like the next guy up the ladder, and then suddenly you look back and you're kind of up the ladder or near the top of the ladder, and there's younger guys trying to be like you, and so it's a really fun circle to get into. And still keep trying to do it. I'm still trying to do it. So I'm waiting for my next hit. I'm writing my next hit as we speak.
I know we're starting to run short on time. What are you going to be doing as far as promotion goes? Any chance of recreating the show on the road again, or? Yeah,
I'm going to take it on the road. I'm doing a bunch around Toronto in middle of October. Now I'm getting calls to go down to Detroit and Toledo and Cleveland. I could take it to New York. I mean, if people see the DVD and want that, I'm real happy to do that show. It's a piece of cake. I'm sitting down. I sit on a stool and talk to people because the visual's going on behind me, so they're seeing visually what's happening, and they're seeing pictures of the bands and old videos and the haircuts and the guitars and the clothes and all that was going on at the time. So it's really an historical evening for the audience who are fans of either the Guess Who or BTO or both, or even Neil Young, because he's in there here and there, the odd little shot that gives an insight into where he came from. Yeah, I can easily take that on the road. I just need a phone call. My whole life is one phone call away.
It sounds like you have absolutely no plans at all at retiring.
No, I have a new album coming out next year. That's a total blues album I got with a female drummer and bass player. That's all blues, heavy blues like late British, late 60s, UK Brit Invasion. I've already got guests on it. Peter Frampton's a guest. Scott Holiday from Rival Sons. Neil Young's a guest. Joe Bonamassa is guesting guitar solo. It's going to be amazing. So I've reinvented myself at Neil Young's urging, saying don't put out a new album of the same old stuff. Do something totally new. Scare yourself, scare the fans, amaze yourself, and maybe you'll amaze the fans. So I wrote all these songs, got a new band of these two ladies playing bass and drums who play like Keith Moon and John Entwistle, and it's called Heavy Blues. So I'm getting out of heavy rock into heavy blues. So that's coming out next spring. I'll probably be talking to you about that soon.
You're getting advice from the man who reinvents his sound about daily. So
that's what he said to me. He said, don't do the same old Randy Bachman and call it a new album. Change your guitar, change your amp, change your clothes, change everything. So I did do that. It was very exciting, and I did not produce myself. I got Kevin Shirley to produce me, and he produces, Silverchair and the Zeppelin reissues and the new Aerosmith, the new Journey, Joe Bonamassa. He's a really credible producer. So to throw my hat into the ring and say, okay, you tell me what to do, and you get more out of me than I can get out of myself, and he did. And I've only got 5 songs done now because we're waiting for the solos to come in from the Billy Gibbons and Frampton and guys like that who are all on tour. So when those come in, we'll have the album mixed, and it's coming out next year. I'm excited about it, so I'll be talking to you about it soon.
I hope you enjoyed this archived interview with Randy Bachman. We'll be back soon with more editions of the VVN Music Podcast, including a talk with longtime Uriah Heep guitarist Mick Box. Remember that you can hear the VVN Music Podcast via iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, and the VVN Music website. For the latest news on the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues, go to vvnmusic.com. If you have any comments or questions about the website or this podcast, please send them to vvnnetwork@gmail.com. Our theme music is performed by Yahar. This program was recorded on November 7th, 2016, and is a production of the VVN Network, copyright 2016.